This week on Writers, Inc.
The arts is a rejection industry. Its default is rejection. Whenever you're successful, it's against the run of play. It's an aberration. So know that going in and don't take it to heart. Don't take it personally. Because if you can't develop a thick skin about that, you won't last long. Because I get rejection. Everyone I know in the business gets rejection, no matter where you are in your career. You get it a lot at the beginning, and you think that'll be all you get. But you got to just be tenacious and persevere, and just follow your own curiosities and passions, and do your best.
J.K. Rowling was nearly homeless when she wrote the first Harry Potter book. Stephen King penned Carrie on a small desk wedged between a washer and dryer. James Patterson worked in advertising and famously crafted the Toys R Us theme song long before becoming an author. Join New York Times bestseller J.D. Barker and a panel of industry powerhouses as they pull back the curtain on some of the world's most prolific authors. Where did they start? What is their process? The biggest names in publishing all have origin stories. All have tips and secrets. What does it take to consistently top the bestseller lists and become a household name? Get your notepad out. School's in session. This is Writers, Inc.
Hi, it's Christine Daigle.
Patrick O'Donnell.
JP Reinflush.
Kevin Tomlinson.
And this is JD Barker. Welcome to Writers, Inc. So we got this weird thing going on. People are actually asking us questions on our website. Like I didn't even realize this was a possible thing, but yeah, we've got questions coming in. A couple of them came in about. We have a website.
What's the website?
You learn something new every day, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Where do people go for that?
For the record, it is writersincpodcast.com.
I think I might say that like at the end of every episode.
I think you do.
Nah.
Well, the funny thing is when we designed it, we put up a thing there where people can request particular guests if they want somebody on the show, if they have questions for a certain guest. Like we've got all these different forms. And like I totally forgot they were even out there. Like we just kind of threw everything at the wall to try and figure out what would work. But I've gotten a couple questions over the last few weeks about book clubs. So I wanted to just kind of mention that because book clubs are a great way to get your book out there, get them in front of a huge group of people. But most people don't really know how to go about doing that. So if you're in that camp and you'd like to check it out, visit BookTrib. BOOKTRIB. They've got a program where you can actually get on their mailing list for book clubs. They can specifically put you in front of them. They've got about 400 book clubs, I think, on their mailing list, and it represents about 17,000 members, which is, a really sizable audience. And if you mention Writers, Inc., they'll actually give you 10% off. So make sure when you talk to that group about it, to do that. But it's, they basically, they put the title out there, and I guess the level of that you participate is totally up to you. You can provide copies to book clubs if you want to do that. They can just send what the book is about. Where you really want to start though is make sure you have questions for book clubs somewhere. A lot of my books actually have them now in the back, like 20 or 30 questions, like specific talking points about the book for a club to discuss. I try to get those up on the website too, but that's a good starting point. And I found that just by having them on the website, a lot of book clubs will just find you. Just by the fact that you've got them out there. So I put them there. I put them in the back of the book and then work with these guys on that type of thing. So booktrib.com.
Yeah. And if you don't have reader questions, we were just talking about this in our author community this week, that actually might be something that get your drinking ready. AI might be good for if you're the author and you can feed your book into chat GPT. People have been using that to generate reader questions and save themselves some time. So there's a thought.
There you go.
I don't know how you feel about it. Did I open a can of worms? I'm sorry.
We made it 2.5 minutes without mentioning AI.
Hey, that's 2 minutes that we made it, right?
Yeah.
Take your shots.
2 minutes longer than we usually last.
Yeah.
That's true.
Well, while we're talking about AI, I might as well go ahead and plug this. So ITW, we've got a town hall coming up on April 11th at noon. We actually wrangled in a copyright attorney who's going to basically discuss AI and the implications of using AI in your content. The gist of it is, from what I'm getting out of this, is there's a very good chance the Supreme Court, somebody down the road, might say AI content it can't be copyrighted, or like that's where this seems to be going. The Copyright Office is leaning against it. That's probably going to go to the Supreme Court at some point as people challenge it. But if they nix that and you have AI content in your book and you publish your book, there's a very good chance that book may have to come down. So personally, I'm kind of just staying away from it until I figure out where all of this stuff is going to land. I think there's going to be some type of mix of human and AI that's going to, satisfy everybody and everybody's going to be happy with down the road. But until I know what that particular mix is, I'm going to avoid it. But we're going to be talking to a copyright attorney who can decipher a lot of this. And the thing is, it's not just here in the U.S. Like he's going to be talking about the U.S. Copyright Office, but they've got the same discussions going on in the U.K. and every other country around the world. I think a lot of people will probably follow the U.S. lead on it, and it's same with the U.K. But that's not necessarily true either.
Which country was it that just blocked AI for privacy concerns? I can't remember which one it was. It's like in the past week.
I have no idea.
All right.
Let me ask the AI. Hold on.
Where are you blocked?
Yeah,
We're blocked
where are you
nowhere,
blocked?
Dave.
Dear ChatGPT.
Oh, man. All right, JP, what's in the news?
All right. This is like the first week in many that it's AI free. First up.
Or was.
Judge finds Texas library books bans unconstitutional and orders those books to be returned. So a federal judge in Austin, Texas found that a library board in Llano County had infringed the constitutional rights of readers by unilaterally removing books it deemed inappropriate. So ultimately, this judge decided that the plan was preventing the First Amendment and has decided that the books need to be returned to the library.
All right. Well, yay for that. I think we've talked about this before. I mean, personally, I think any book should be allowed in a library. If a parent wants to keep their kid from reading it, throw some type of personal restriction on it, let it filter down to that level. Yeah. I don't want anybody else making these kind of decisions for me.
100%.
Yeah, I'm cool with this. I think public libraries are the place for all voices, because you're accommodating the entire culture, not just a narrow set of it. School libraries, I have a little bit of a different take, but only because there's just certain material that we can just definitively say is not really appropriate for all ages. But there's where things get sticky. But when it comes to just public libraries, man, I think it should be pretty open.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, we already, as parents are responsible for what movies our kids are watching, what they're doing on the internet. I see this as kind of the same thing. Well, we're supposed to be.
Yeah. Those things called kids. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, okay.
You're responsible.
Mine are
You're just
grown
not
now.
necessarily being responsible.
Exactly.
Yeah, I definitely watched The Exorcist when I was 6. So
that explains a lot, JP.
yeah, I know. Whatever. Next up in the news, book publishing's bilingual boom. So the U.S. market for Spanish language books is expanding, driven by bilingual families, schools with dual language programs, libraries in communities with large Spanish-speaking populations, and etc. So bilingual books have gained popularity, especially among children, parents, students, and services like Enlingos and Curio have launched in 2022, which offer subscription boxes for bilingual and Spanish language children books. So I was just curious what your guys' thoughts were on this. I know with me, my co-writer is an immigrant from Venezuela, and we are looking into translating our books into Spanish first because of the access that we currently have as a co-writer. So I just found this interesting because this seems to be the right move that we made.
Yeah, personally, I sell a ton of books in Spanish. There's some Spanish markets where I sell like even better than I do in English. The things you have to keep in mind is there's a lot of different dialects of Spanish. It's like the Spanish that they have in Spain is very different from what they speak in Mexico, and it's very different from South America. I've got a publisher, so they make those changes as they ship the books out. So that's something to keep in mind. But I think there's no reason why authors at this point shouldn't be considering other languages. Spanish is a big one. German is another one that, authors, especially in the thriller world, seem to do very well in. And I'm finding that this is opening up. I think a lot of indie authors, we've gotten to the point where we can run our US or English-based business. And a lot of indies now are looking at these foreign languages. And I think as that expands, it's going to get easier to do. It's going to be easier to find translators. It's going to be easier to, get those books out there. Even dealing with the Amazon marketplace, the website, the interface in different languages, I think is going to get easier and easier as time goes on. So by all means, I think every author out there, once you get a handle on what's going on in your primary language, start looking at some of these other ones.
This is one of those things I'm really hoping that AI can actually help solve, like for indie authors, because it's a lot tougher for indie authors to get those translations. It can be cost prohibitive, and we have no like means of quality control if you don't speak that language. I have a deal with some guys in Germany to do German translations, and I'm kind of looking for a similar thing in other languages. I absolutely think Spanish first is probably a very good idea, just because the market is pretty big in the U.S. alone, but also several other related nations. And even if the Spanish isn't specific to that region, it's usually readable. So you can at least benefit from that.
Definitely. Last up in the news, Rakuten Kobo expands digital reading offering in the US and UK with Kobo Plus. So this is an all-you-can-read and listen subscription. So this launched, I think, yesterday as we are recording. I think April 5th. And basically in the US and the UK, there's now an unlimited ebooks plan, an unlimited audiobooks plan, and then an unlimited combined plan. And in the US, that's $7.99 for those separately, or $9.99 for both, which is a huge competition in comparison to KU. So this is pretty big news, I would say. And I'm curious what you guys' thoughts are on that.
I do really well in KU. So I don't know that I'll actually be taking advantage of this. I think that's going to be the biggest hurdle that they're going to have. It's, a lot of authors are doing well in Kindle Unlimited, and swaying those authors, because you're exclusive. If you're there, you have to basically, if you want to participate in this, you're going to have to pull it out of there. I don't think a lot of authors are going to be willing to do that, at least not initially.
Yeah, I don't think that this is going to necessarily draw people out of KU, but it is a way for authors who are distributing wide to get a sort of KU-like experience without the exclusivity. At Draft to Digital, we have an announcement going out about this very thing, probably in the next 10 or 20 minutes, including a blog post and everything. So you can read up more about this at drafttodigital.com. But we're really excited to add this as like an extension of this program, because when they launched this initially, it was just in like the Netherlands, and and it didn't get a lot of traction at first, but they've slowly been expanding this. And I think now with the English speaking markets that they're adding, I think this could become a contender for actual competition against Kindle Unlimited. So I'm kind of excited to see where it goes. My books are just auto added.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I know Kobo is huge in Canada. I don't actually have a Kobo reader. I have a Kindle because I've lived in both countries, and I started reading ebooks when I was living in the U.S. But actually over here, like in the libraries, because when I was in Michigan libraries, I could get books on my Kindle. But over here, all the libraries are Kobo only. Like they don't read on the Kindle, or historically haven't. So I know it's been a big market like outside of the U.S. So it will be interesting to see if they can push more into the U.S. market with this.
Well, competition is good for consumers usually. So hopefully that'll happen.
Definitely. And I'm really interested because of the topics that we've had about bookshop.org and the fact that that website supports local indie businesses, which seems to be the direction that a lot of people are taking when they're looking at what they're purchasing. And so since that's launching an ebook platform, and the fact that, KU is very restrictive on that, I think that this new program with its non-exclusivity might actually drive some authors to reconsider where to put those books when that launches.
Awesome. Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing that.
This episode is brought to you by MasterWriter. MasterWriter is a powerful collection of writing tools and references assembled in one easy-to-use program. Included are word families, phrases, synonyms, rhymes, definitions, figures of speech, pop culture, a searchable Bible of intensifiers, and a unique collection of intense descriptive words. Why struggle to find the right word when you can have all the possibilities in an instant? While a computer can't compete with the mind and imagination of a writer, the mind can't compete with the word choices that MasterWriter will give you in an instant. When the two work together, great things happen. Check it out today at masterwriter.com.
So, JD, who's up this week?
This week we've got Anthony McCarten. He's a New Zealand-born novelist, playwright, journalist, television writer, 4-time Academy Award-nominated filmmaker. His latest thriller is called Going Zero and releases April 11th. Here he is, Anthony McCarten.
Anthony McCarten, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much.
So, what do Andy Warhol, Winston Churchill, two popes, Stephen Hawking, Freddie Mercury of Queen, Whitney Houston have all have in common? You've either written a screenplay, book, or both with them as a main character. How do you come up with a project? How do you choose?
It's a funny thing. There's something that usually tweaks my interest, but it doesn't necessarily initiate, Thunderbirds are go. There's a sort of checklist, and I'm not even quite conscious of what that is, and it differs from project to project. But there's a few boxes I need to tick before I really commit, because in all of these endeavors, they usually involve a considerable amount of time, and so you're going to be with them for a long time. So your curiosity has to be quite deep, and you need to be stirred by the subject. There's got to be something, not just the person's name, but something about their life or their journey that stirs you. And then, I usually follow that up with a bit of reading, and I'm sort of circling the subject at that point, and I'm kind of looking for something else, which is usually, is there anything I could offer to the conversation or to the sort of received picture that we have of this person? And if it's a famous person, of course, it's even harder, because there's usually so much been written about them, and most of the obvious facts are known. And yet that's the sort of, I think, the bar that I set for myself is there something new that I can offer if I take something on, which is a biographical subject.
You said that there's a checklist. Can you share a couple of things off of that checklist?
Well, those are a couple. I have to be stirred. I have to think I can bring something new to the subject. And the subject also has to have some sort of contemporary relevance, not because it's not necessarily an arbitrary thing, but generally it's connected to whether it stirs me. The things that are concerning me about myself or people I know or the world at large usually have a basis in something that's going on right now, and the stories that then attract me speak to that. So that's the kind of scattershot approach I take.
Okay. Now, would you rather create your own project, or do you like it when people pitch a project at you?
Generally, I mean, I don't mind someone pitching a project at me, but it's less likely to stick. The stuff that naturally arises out of me is going to go, it's going to be more deeply felt. I'm going to have what I think Goethe called an elective affinity for.
Okay. Now, as an example, Bohemian Rhapsody, how did you prepare yourself, to create the screenplay, the book? How far did you immerse yourself into the story?
Considerably. I think if you're going to speculate on what transpired between people who really lived and really had relationships, then you need to do it responsibly. And that's a sort of label I apply to when these biographical portraits is sort of responsible speculation. To do that, you have to know your stuff. And the best place to go and get that information is to talk to the horse's mouth, which is if either the person themselves, if they're alive, interview them at length, exhaustively, or if they're not alive, those who knew them firsthand, which is certainly the case with Freddie. I never met Freddie, but the band was very much alive and open to being interviewed. And then you kind of, at a certain point, if you're lucky, you feel you have them, you can grasp them, and you feel more confident of putting words into their mouth. But there's always an element of trespass here. You have to have put your kind of nerves aside and say, I think I can pretty much come close to what Freddie Mercury might have said on a given day, or Winston Churchill might have said, in the House of Commons, in a private moment. or Pope Benedict could have said to Pope Francis. It's pretty audacious, to try and be a ventriloquist of those sort of luminaries. But you just have to sort of pluck up your courage, really,
Right.
and go in and do your best job.
Okay. Now, like, again, talking about Bohemian Rhapsody, which I absolutely love that movie. I watched that going to Belfast, and it was one of the plane movies, and I'm like, oh, this is fabulous. So it made the trip go a lot quicker. So thank you. Now, did you listen to a lot of Queen music just to kind of like get your head into that space?
Sure. I mean, when you're dealing with like doing a portrait of a musician, the first thing you got to know is that you have access to the music, and then you have to sort of find a way through the catalog and look for those autobiographical stories that will augment the storytelling, so that when you go to a song, if you're lucky, it's not time out from the narrative. It's almost a deeper expression of the narrative at a given moment. I mean, this is a rule that's been known on Broadway for many years. That the music cannot be a deviation. It can't be time out. It can't be marking time. It's got to be a progression. I think Rodgers and Hammerstein were the first ones who really took show tunes and made them not just little baubles that you put on the Christmas tree, but actually intrinsic to the drama. So that's one of the great joys of this thing. If you get an incredible catalog to work with, like Queen's, or I've got a show on Broadway right now with Neil Diamond's work, which in its very nature is quite autobiographical. And so you go through them and say, look, this is an artist who's tried to tell their own story through song themselves. So how can I choose those songs and fit it into the story? So that's part of the challenge and the joy of working with great catalogs.
So what is your system, or do you have one, for writing a screenplay from a novel? It's like, I think to myself, a novel can be 60,000 to 120,000 words. And a screenplay, correct me if I'm wrong, it could be what, 12,000 words?
Yeah. How do you do it?
Yeah. How do you do that and do it justice?
Yeah. I've only ever really adapted my own novels. And that's kind of challenging, because you've kind of told your story in what you think is the optimum way, but it's the optimum way for a novel. And now you have to come up with the optimum version for the screen. So I kind of think it's a little like dismantling a vehicle. You've created this beautiful motor vehicle. It's fuel economic, and it can go 120 miles an hour. Very comfortable to ride, and does everything it says on the brochure. Well, as much as you love that thing, you've got to be dispassionate and break it apart, lay it all out on the front yard, and say, okay, what will serve me now that I'm creating something completely different? And take the essence of it and rebuild something anew. If you're shy of doing that, if you're too in love with the original material, even though you might have created it, you're gonna run into trouble, because it's a very different form.
Okay, so say I'm a new screenplay writer, and I'm looking for advice from somebody who's done it a bunch of times. What would you suggest to a new person doing this?
I would say isolate a governing theme, even if it can be a single word, and say, what is this story fundamentally about, in your perception, in your reading of it? Or what is this life fundamentally about, if it's a biographical subject? And it might even come down to a single word. If it does, stick it on a Post-it note and put it on the top of your computer screen. Now start assembling your screenplay and make sure that every scene speaks to that word, because that's your theme. And there's no room for deviation. There's not enough space. There's not enough time. You've got to just really cut it down to the essence. And if you can distill something, if you can distill War and Peace down into a single word. It's a theme about this. It's a novel about this. Then you're in a really good place to then, to reshape it, reduce it, distill it into something which is, 2 hours of screen time.
Now, I tend to jump around during an interview, so please be patient with me. Mechanics. When you're writing a novel or a screenplay, do you dictate or do you type?
I type, yeah. I don't know anything until I start writing. The ideas come to me as I'm writing, and I play with them, and I put stuff down, take it away, and I go, okay, that's an interesting idea, and I didn't have it before I started writing.
So you don't do intricate plots beforehand?
Structure is a different thing. No, I tend to structure very, very carefully. For me, I think my rule of thumb, if it's a very constructed piece, if it's a very story-driven piece, I need to know the ending, because that will dictate to me the rest of the story that precedes it. And then I will map it all out. I don't need to know everything, but I need to know a great deal so that I know, A, I need to know what my destination is. And then B, I have to find the most engaging, joyful, interesting way to get there.
Now, I think one of your superpowers, or what I enjoy with your work, is the dialogue. It's very dialogue heavy. Is there something special you do with that, or just to create that, or it just comes naturally, or how does that come about?
Yeah, I think I always had a knack with that, and I don't know why. I had this sort of ability to have an ear for how people speak. But yeah, it's been something that's been consistent even in my novel writing. I remember early reviews, complimenting the dialogue. I haven't really tried to analyze it because it doesn't really profit me to know what I'm doing. I don't want to, like anything, it's any creative act. You don't want to know too much about how you do it. Let's go away.
Just let it happen. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I'm a new writer, or a newer writer. As far as dialogue goes, is there anything any hints or help to kind of coach me along for writing good dialogue?
Well, you speak differently than I do, right? So bad dialogue is everybody sounds the same. Or in other words, everybody sounds like the author. And there are writers who are guilty of that. But we all have our verbal picadillos and idiosyncrasies, and you've got to have an ear for them. And something I've always had is when someone says an expression or something, a turn of phrase, I think, oh, that's interesting. I'll pop that away somewhere in the memory banks. Because there's so much color and daily poetry in the way people talk, euphemisms that people throw up, and memorable lines, memorable thoughts. A great line of dialogue is usually a great idea simply expressed. It's not usually something elaborately worded wrapped around something vacuous. That's you can put as much fuzz and reverb and stuff on dialogue as you like, and it seems to have all this fireworks, but that won't do it. It's got to be an interesting idea, and then when you express an interesting idea succinctly, I think that's the key to making dialogue memorable. And I think it's a truism known to all the great epigrammists, is that great idea simply expressed in the fewest words.
Okay. Now to the business of writing. How do you deal, or how have you dealt with rejection? That's something that if you're going to be in this business, it's going to happen. It's going to happen a lot. What's your mechanism? How do you deal with it?
Sulk.
A pity party.
Yeah. I allow myself about 5 minutes to sulk. But look, here's what I've learned. That the arts is a rejection industry. Its default is rejection. Whenever you're successful, it's against the run of play. It's an aberration. So know that going in. and don't take it to heart. Don't take it personally. Because if you can't develop a thick skin about that, you won't last long, because I get rejection. Everyone I know in the business gets rejection, no matter where you are in your career. You get it a lot at the beginning, and you think that'll be all you get. But you got to just be tenacious and persevere, and just follow your own curiosities and passions, and do your best.
Looking back on your career, what was the moment that you realized, hey, I could do this for a living? I don't know how far back this goes, but do you remember like what you were doing, who you were with, what the situation was? Was there like a boom light bulb moment?
Yeah, it probably was. There's 2 points. One where I thought I'm quite good at this, which was really early, and it simply came from I'd written something, and a friend complimented me on it. And he wasn't particularly literary, but he read it and he goes, "You're really good at this." And so that was a very, very, I think it was probably about 16 years old, and that was a very, very early encouragement. And sometimes when you're young, that's all you need to set you on a path. But as to making a living from it, I think it was I was writing poems when I started out, because it was a simple form, and I love language, and it was something easily done. And there was no pressure to make a living from writing poems. I think there's about 3 people in the world who can live from writing poems. So you never beat yourself up that you weren't making a living wage. But then I ended up in an acting group, and one of the actors said that a theater was empty, and that if I could write a play very quickly, we could mount a play. So I sort of found myself in the theater and writing a play, and it was a comedy, a sort of sex comedy about male strippers, and I remember opening night of this thing, and the lights came up at the end, and I saw a person in the row in front of me lean to their friend and say, "It's a hit." And I remember the thrill of,
wow,
oh, I might make some money out of this. I could leave my day job. That distant idea of royalties might be a reality for me, and so that was the start. And it in fact did become a hit, and it put food on the table, and it allowed me the great privilege of being exclusively a writer, and I've maintained that for the rest of my life.
What was the name of that play?
It was called Ladies' Night.
Ladies' Night. Outstanding. So let's go to Going Zero, your newest novel. Could you kind of give us a synopsis of what it's about and what the general theme is?
Yeah, there's a sort of government project which is meant to elevate the level of surveillance potential in the US government, for the security of the American people. And a great deal of money has been invested in bringing the best technology together. And it's being run by a particular individual called Cy Baxter. And yet the full funding is contingent upon it running a beta test. And the test that is developed is that 10 contestants chosen at random will be told to go zero, which is to try and leave zero footprint, and get lost for 30 days. If they can stay lost for 30 days, then they will each win $3 million. And the government enterprise, which is called Fusion, will be tasked with finding them in as shorter order as possible. So the clock is set running. The 10 candidates are set loose, and the government begins its pursuit. And that's the sort of premise of the book.
I really like the pacing of the book. It keeps you going. and you go by hours and days, and I think that's very clever, and it keeps you engaged, and it's like I again, you don't want to put the book down, and that as a writer, that's the goal. You don't want the person to put the one more chapter. Come on, you want to see what's going to happen next, So I think when I was doing my due diligence and researching you and this book, you came up with the idea for this book at the dinner table. It was just like a conversation. Is that true?
Yeah. It was basically, you probably felt it yourself. You've had these moments where you're sitting around with friends, and someone tells a story saying, it was pretty creepy today. I went to the store and I bought something, and I came out, and then I got, advertisements on my mobile phone for the very store I was in. I mean, how do they know to track me? And you go, oh no, and then suddenly everybody's pouring into the conversation with similar examples of the sort of the tracking that's going on through our digital purchases and our digital lives, and not only that, through the banking system, through medical records, and so the idea of the Big Brother state was sort of fundamentally underlying this is, where are we at right now? What is the current state of play with surveillance?
Yeah, it does bring out emotions. There's no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm. There's this validity to both arguments. Are we safer if everything about us is known? Probably. Are we happier though? And that's a completely different question.
Right.
And to what right is privacy a right anymore? Or are we entering a new state of consciousness where we want everything about us to be known? Because it would seem that we are heading that way. Everybody is beyond candid these days. The only people you could argue who want to know, who want to keep secrets now, are criminals.
Yeah, that's very true.
If you've got nothing to hide, then why do you care if everything about you is known? If it makes you safer. So there's some really interesting debates, but I do think the invasions of privacy and the protections are being eroded, and we need some more regulation of that.
Could you share with us some specifics with as far as your research went into this book?
Yeah, it's reading. There's many fine writers on the subject of surveillance capitalism, the way that the capitalist system is increasingly being driven by data on us, data which we almost unwittingly disclose when we opening a web page and we're assailed by 16 little panels that pop up. To get rid of them, we're actually giving away our privacy. We're unwittingly clicking, I agree, and those little the digital spies are now at our bidding, following us everywhere we go. So there's many interesting, great writers on this subject. This book, however, is not a polemic. It's an entertainment, and it doesn't seek to judge those issues or overly debate them, but it shows both sides of the coin. That the whole idea of this fusion initiative at the center of this book is to keep people safe. And it was driven by a mass shooting. That the guy who's running it, this Cy Baxter, he lost a close family member through a mass shooting, and it took way too long for the gunman to be caught and taken down. And he thought, we need to do better. Detection, surveillance needs to be heightened. We need to stop this, and technology, because he believes in technology, can play a role. So that's the idea to which, is technology our savior, or is it leading us into strange new territories? And I don't know if you've been following the whole virtual reality stuff with robots and stuff who are starting to take over human functions, developing the functions and abilities that we have always, for thousands of years thought were exclusively human. And it's incredibly eerie to see that we will soon be challenged in whole sets of areas by more competent creatures than us, and they are, machines.
Right.
That's happening in real time. These chat bots and stuff that everybody's investing billions in now. So the aim with this book was to present society not as it is today, but 5 minutes in the future. And so I did a lot of research in stuff that's emerging. Not all of it's available today, but it is in the works.
Right. And it's also a thriller. You love the cat and mouse, chase. There's something to be said about that. I think that stirs a part of our brains as humans, and it's like, oh, this is cool. You want to, and you want to root for, the good guy or the good gal, or you just, there's some basic stuff in there, and there's some very sophisticated stuff, and you melded it well together.
No, these human beings are trying to literally outwit machines.
Yes.
And, man versus machine, and who wins. So that's sort of at the center of it as well. So
with your works, do you have a common theme or a feeling that you want your audience to walk away with like every book or screenplay that do you do that purposefully? I certainly want them to walk away with a feeling, but it's not the same one with each thing. Right. It can't be. Yeah. No, but it's usually that there's something additive I brought to a conversation on a particular subject. And as going back to the beginning of our conversation, that's one of the boxes I need to tick. Is there something I can say about surveillance society with this book in an entertaining fashion? That's a thriller and delivers as a thriller. With Winston Churchill, was there something interesting or new I could say about Winston Churchill? They're not the same things. They're not the same messages. Right. So where can people learn more about you and your works? Podcasts like this. I'm not a digital person. I don't have any social media at all. My kids tell me I'm a loser and need to snap out of it. That's what kids do. They're saying you could have like 30 followers or 3,000 or 3 million followers, and I go, what would I do with them? I think I fear basically having to spend too many hours of a day keeping an audience fit. Okay. Going Zero is Anthony's latest novel. Go out and get it. It is now up on pre-sale and will go live April 11th. Anthony, thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure speaking with you. You betcha. Thank you. Take care.
This episode is brought to you by our amazing sponsor, Laterpress. Laterpress is a platform built to help authors declare independence. It lets authors create digital books and sell them directly to readers through a branded website. Laterpress is free to publish on and doesn't take any commission on direct sales. It's one of the most effective ways readers can directly support authors they love. Get started today at laterpress.com. JD, you write a lot of books, obviously, and the rest of you guys. How do you keep it fresh, and how do you keep your voice in there with all these? He's obviously written a bunch of different stuff. You're going from two popes to Queen, to Winston Churchill, to and the latest book that he wrote was really good. It kept me engaged. It was a fabulous book, and we'll talk a little more about that a little bit. But how do you keep it fresh? I mean, I honestly, I kind of cheat a little bit. So I've got a PDF document that's got, like the top 10 or 20 ideas that I would like to write next. And then I usually, when it's time for me to pick the next project, I talk to my agent and we talk to my editors and we decide which one they feel is the best one for me to write next. And a lot of that is, they got to break out their crystal ball because they're going to get that book 6 months to a year from the time we, finish that conversation. And then the book is going to come out like a year and a half or so after that, so we're talking about these things 2 years or so before they
they really come out. So they got to try and figure out what they're going to be selling, 2 years from now. Like my latest book, the one that, a couple of you have read, it's got a lot of sex in it. It's a dark thriller that leans towards that. And the reason we went with that particular one is we feel in Hollywood, there's a pendulum that's kind of swung just a little bit too far in one direction. You could totally show, a person getting shot, getting dismembered, their head exploding on screen. Nobody even blinks an eye anymore, but you show two people having sex in a movie today and everybody freaks out on you. That wasn't the case, 20 years ago. So like, it feels like that pendulum has swung just a little bit too far. The people in Hollywood are trying to figure out how to get back. So with this particular book, we kind of, we considered that, and, we wanted to give them something that would give them a vehicle to do that. So that's how I do it.
It was interesting to me when Anthony was talking about how he tackles celebrities with respect, but without fear. And I thought that was kind of interesting because I often will pick something to write that is a little bit scary for me. I almost find like the fear helps me write. Do you think that writing is a balance between like fear and will, or do you like just always have no fear when you're writing the next thing?
I really don't have any fear in it. I mean, I basically just tell the story that I want to tell. And, if people are going to object to it, I really don't care. Like I want to get the story down. I try to keep those thoughts, I think, out of my head. Like if I write a particular paragraph, I'm like, I think my agent's not going to like this. I leave the paragraph in there and I wait to hear back. Most of the time she doesn't like this or he doesn't like this, but, I was right about that, but I don't take it out, because of that kind of thing. One of the things that Anthony is really good at, pretty much every biopic that he's ever done is he shows the dark side to a lot of these people, which is something that you don't typically see, like with Whitney Houston, for example. I don't know if any of you have seen the biopic yet, but he has, he doesn't shy away from the uglier parts of Whitney Houston's life.
Yeah.
But, like I was raised on Whitney Houston. Like we didn't see any of that, really in the press until the later years. They were very good at hiding that. And I think he digs for that, when he's working on a project like that. And I think that's why those movies are so successful. He finds the pieces that, we missed, the juicy nuggets that, we know make that person real and rounded.
Yeah. And I think you're right about like not having fear about what you're writing, but do you ever like to tackle projects that you think like, oh man, I don't know
the subject
if
is
I
too
can
big.
do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've done that. I mean, I'll do that kind of thing occasionally just for the challenge of it. Like I don't know anything at all about, I don't know, just fire eaters. And so I'll go read everything I can find on that and see if that's going to work for a book. And sometimes it doesn't, which means, and I don't consider that wasted time, because what I figure is later, something, a fire eater is going to factor into a story I have, but I have taken on like historical topics, like, or archaeological topics that I knew nothing about at the beginning. And just kind of had to do a deep dive and just learn everything I could. And even if I don't use everything I encounter in that, that stuff is just invaluable for future books. I've worked in like traces of details from certain historical events that I got from other research, So I'm not afraid to tackle that stuff. I think it's kind of fun.
I just fear that the story isn't going to resonate and nobody's going to buy the book. That's my fear.
Well, he talked about rejection too, right? Like I loved his take on that, and he says he sulks a little bit, but he said the art's default is rejection. Like that was something that he brought up, and that's so true. You can sit down with anybody.
I've just never been rejected.
It's coming.
I'll reject you.
Trust me.
Here's your first one. Get out of here, Kevin.
Yeah.
It never feels right if a book is out on submission and you don't, like, once that first rejection is out of the way, I almost feel better about it, about the project. I can't remember where it was I heard this, but like you can pretty much talk to like any famous actor or actress, and they will tell you about all the roles that they lost or didn't get or thought they were going to get and didn't get, like all the times that people said no to them. And you don't really catch that, but like it happens to everybody in this particular world. You have to just develop a thick skin for it and just kind of move on.
Well, he said arts is a rejection industry. And I like that.
Yeah.
That was really good. So when his latest book, he got the idea, Going Zero, from somebody when they're eating dinner. The idea kind of popped up and they're talking about surveillance. is the government going too far? Are we sacrificing our privacy for security? And he deals with it really in a very clever way with this book. And it really keeps you going. Like I said before, the momentum's really good. There's like dates and times, and it's almost like a countdown clock to the end. So you want to see what's going to happen next. You guys ever utilize anything like that? How do you keep people going?
I haven't used it in a book yet. I've seen a lot of it in real life. I'm looking around my office right now. I've got an Amazon Echo sitting off to my side. My phone is on my desk. My laptop is open right now. Like all these devices are probably listening to me. But you become like my robot dog is right outside the door. Like it's listening to every word. But you become used to it, right? Like it's just now it's a part of our life. If this was 1950 or we were coming out of World War II, like people wouldn't be quite as open to the idea of things just sitting around that can do this. And today
JD,
it's just a standard. It's
major premise in this recent book.
It is in the new one. It's the new one is kind of a warning against that, and Anthony touched on it a little bit. We basically all hit the agree button, on the terms of service that come up.
Yep.
None of us really think about what, that actually means. Every app on our phone is watching the other apps, they're all talking to each other. They're using all of that information. And I used quite a bit of that in the new book, as a cautionary tale, this in my book, not to get too far off track, a husband and wife download a particular app to help their marriage. And they don't realize just how far reaching that particular app is once they dig into that world. And Anthony kind of goes there too. What I liked about his is it really got me thinking, like, do you guys think you could drop off the radar for 30 days if you had to the point where nobody could find you?
No.
I could absolutely do that.
Kevin, nobody's looking for you now.
I know.
Let's reject Kevin.
Did you guys watch this TV show Hunted that came out a couple years ago? It was
I
like
did.
a reality show.
I
and they
think
had
I know the one you're
cybersecurity
talking about.
experts
Yeah.
and after watching that, I'm like, no, people would find me in like 2 days. I'd be done.
I'm going to tell you, I have spent the better part of the last decade deep diving and researching how to disappear. I have a character in my Quake Runner series. That's her whole thing, is how you disappear. She is only able to do it because she has this advanced quantum-based AI that can, help her crack, hide her from security cameras and things like that. So that's the magic of that book, right? But I will tell you, it is possible. I've interviewed people, some of the authors of some of these books, like ex-CIA agents and stuff. You can do it, but it takes a high level of discipline. Like you basically just cease to exist, and you have no life outside of a small room somewhere in the world, and that's it. So yeah, you can do it. You just won't have any life whatsoever.
Well, I think a lot of people in reading a book like this, you start thinking that, well, all this means is I've got to turn off my phone. I've got to stay off the internet and not go home for a couple of days. That's not really what it's about. Like if you take a prescription, like they can monitor you through the medications that you take. If you tend to order the same food when you walk into a fast food restaurant anywhere in the country, they could catch you with that. It's those little things I think that would actually get you. That's basically what I took away from this book. It's not the tech stuff that's really going to get you. It's the day-to-day things that are part of your routine that you don't really consider.
I'm starting to realize that it is much more possible for you to remain entirely anonymous and unknown, and no one knows anything about you when you're dead, than it is when you're alive. Like there's all these John Does and Jane Does show up all the time, and for some reason we can never figure out who they are or what happened to them. But I can be tracked. My every movement can be tracked by the burrito I buy, apparently. So that's interesting to me.
Then they just keep sending you the burritos, and I'm like, but I just bought this burrito. I don't need to buy it again right now, 5 minutes later.
I honestly think that John and Jane Does are going to kind of go away. There's websites right now where you can take a picture of somebody, and it could, you could snap a person in a crowd. You can upload that picture to this website, and it'll find that person anywhere they appear online. Which is something that, like the government agencies were playing with that years ago, and they basically got nixed. The privacy concerns, overwhelmed the agencies, and they said, okay, we're not going to do this. They probably
I'm
still
sure
did
they're
it.
totally not doing it.
Yeah, they kept doing it. They just kept their mouths shut. But now, like, you can go on Google and say identify person from picture, and you will get 100 different websites that will do it for you. And they charge you like $12 or whatever, but they're accurate. They will find pretty much anybody. And that
Facebook used to do it for free.
Yeah, they used to. I honestly think cops are going to get lazy, with all this tech. They're going to forget how to solve crimes the old-fashioned way.
All right. I had a craft question. I was really interested in Anthony talking about his how he writes screenplays.
I was going to talk about that. Yeah.
And he will just narrow it down to one word and put it on a sticky on his laptop. And I thought that was really interesting because I also listened to Brian McDonald over on his You Are a Storyteller podcast. And he talks a lot about writing screenplays and has extensively talked about, if there's a joke that is not on theme, even if it's a killer joke, he'll cut it. And I know JP is huge on story hypothesis. It's something you do when you're editing with clients. I'm just thinking about screenplays and novels and how can we better use theme to just take a scalpel to what we write, or do we need to?
I'm the wrong person to ask because my current screenplay is 4.5 hours long.
I was going to ask you, JD, how many screenplays have
Lord
you
of the...
Yeah. No, if you honestly, if you want to listen to a really good Writers Inc. episode about this, go back to 127 with Gillian Flynn. And she talks about adapting Gone Girl. And she had never done it before. They asked her to do it. So she basically took her book, she wrote it out as a screenplay. She ended up, I think she said 4.5, 5 hours or something like that. And then David Fincher came aboard. And he basically taught her how to do exactly what you were just getting at, Christine, which is basically trim the fat away, and cut, it's worse than cutting your darlings. You're taking a lot of that story out, but you have to trim it down to that core theme, those core elements, and get it down to that 1.5, 2 hour mark. Yeah. And Fincher taught her how to do that.
Well, I like the analogy that he used of you have this vehicle and you completely take it apart and put it on your front lawn, and then you put it back together again. So you go from an SUV to, a little whatever, So yeah, I thought that was very interesting how he talked about that.
Yeah. I mean, for me, theme defines what is the point? And if you can really get to the bare minimum of what is the point of what you're trying to say, then I feel like that drives the story and that can help you cut the fat of the story. For him, it's a one word thing. For me, it's looking at 9 basic needs of a human and just trying to create a definitive statement, and then using that as a reflection of how the story progresses through when those needs aren't met versus when they are. And that helps me decide when those scenes are. So I think if you use theme, as long as you have a clear definition of what is the point of your story, that's when theme has its strength.
I like that in theory. I mean, I would do that. I haven't done that. I mean, I don't think I've ever written anything to a specific theme, but I have seen themes emerge. So I think subconsciously I am, applying some kind of theme. If I go back and look at all the books in my Kotler series, I could probably find a general theme for each one beyond just the, this is an adventurer, taking on the bad guys. Mm-hmm. I've noticed that there are kind of trends within the book. So
yeah, I mean, for me, it's your character needs define the theme. They're so intrinsically tied to each other that as long as you know what the progress of your character needs and wants throughout the story, as long as you make that clear, you don't ever have to define the theme to yourself, but you're clearly making some type of point in your story based off of their needs and the plot development.
All right. So do you guys know the end of your books when you start writing your books? Or when does it pop in?
Not at all.
I do. I always have my beginning, middle, something that's going to happen in the middle, and I have my end in mind. It may change, but I think it's good to know what your destination is before you get in the car.
Yeah, I always know what my end is initially. Whether it ends up there is another story.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, it's this sounds really good until...
I never knew where I was going when we lived in a van, and I don't know where I'm going with the bookstore.
You're such a renegade, Kevin. Gosh. All right. Dialogue. One thing that popped out at me for his book and his work is dialogue. He's really good at it. I know we've talked about this before. I think it was what James Patterson said, sit in a restaurant or a coffee shop and just start typing conversations. Do you have any other suggestions for the folks out there for writing good dialogue?
That was actually one of mine.
Oh, I thought it was Patterson.
That's one of the few things.
I intermingled.
No, I didn't steal that one from him. Yeah, no. When I mentor people, a lot of times dialogue is their weakest part, and I think a lot of people don't read their dialogue out loud. I think that's important. If you don't actually read it out loud yourself, let your software do it. Microsoft Word, Scrivener, or any one of these, you can highlight text and it'll read it to you, so you can hear what it sounds like. But I learned to write dialogue by sitting in the coffee shops doing exactly that. I would just sit there with my laptop. I would listen into the conversation happening at the table next to me, and I would just type it out. I know ethically and morally that's probably very bad. But it allowed me to capture realistic dialogue. And the one thing that you really notice is, most people don't speak in complete sentences. There's a lot of muffled words, a lot of ums and ahs and things like that. You have to find a good middle ground with that. From a pacing standpoint, sentences get shorter and get clipped as if you speed up the tension, quiet little conversation, you can have a long, string of text, you use it to help you with pacing, but listening to real conversations, I think is key. And if you can't do it at a coffee shop, just do it off TV, watch the news, watch a TV show or something and just type it out. I think it's important just to see it on paper, too, to see the actual words, how they play out on paper.
Yeah. And after I have my first draft, that's something that I'll often do is just do dialogue passes. And I mean, you can print it out and just highlight each character's dialogue in a color and just go through it all and read it to see if their voice sounds accurate. So, dialogue passes, like a editing pass, is something good to do at the end.
I was going to actually suggest paying close attention to TV and film dialogue, particularly in shows that are kind of casual conversation heavy. But I will say, in my opinion, the masters of dialogue on the page are the modern comic book writers. They're able to encapsulate, when it's not, monologues about their villainy or something. I mean, when I read a lot of comics that have very casual conversations interspersed throughout. And so you get the dramatic punch, you get all of that stuff in that dialogue. And the images do help tell part of that story, but I could just hear the dialogue in certain books and I would know exactly how that scene is set and, what the emotions are supposed to be. So I think that's a pretty good thing to study.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so JD, who's up next week?
Oh, this one's going to be fun. How many of you are watching You on Netflix? Big show of hands there. So we've got Carolyn Kepnes coming on. The show is based on her book series, and her latest title is called For You and Only You, and releases April 25th. So she's going to be telling us all about it.
All right, sounds great. If you'd like to be notified as soon as new episodes publish, make sure you go to writersincpodcast.com and sign up now, and leave us a question on the website if you want. We'll see you next episode, and have a great week of writing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Writers Inc. Access the show notes and leave a comment at writersincpodcast.com.